Hi. Well, the first talk I gave about medical cannabis was very different from this one. It was in the Israeli parliament, and I was brought there by Mr. Boaz Wachtel to speak to the parliament members, to the parliament committee for health and drugs. And basically, it wasn't as full as you see in this picture. The meeting had 6 parliament members, and we were introduced to them basically as patients using medical cannabis illegally to talk to the parliament about the issue of medical cannabis. This was the first ever meeting in Israel relating the subject of medical cannabis. And what I told them at the meeting was very simple. I introduced myself. I explained I'm a 21-year-old discharged soldier who was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I had a doctor's recommendation for using medical cannabis, which is the first time I ever encountered cannabis in my life. And on top of all of this, I had a very nice letter saying that I have a prescription for smoking cannabis. Smoking cannabis from a doctor. Now, this prescription was completely illegal. Back at the time, there was no medical program in Israel. There were no prescriptions. There was no licensing system. There was nothing. What happened was I would walk down the street, and if I encountered a police officer, in a case such as here, I had to smoke, because if I carried the cannabis, it was illegal. The prescription said smoking cannabis is legal. Kind of absurd. The second thing I explained to these parliament members is the second absurd. I was hospitalized at the time, and I had to send my mom to buy me cannabis from a drug dealer. Now, I don't know what impact my part of this talk was. What I do know is that 4 years passed, and I received my license for using medical cannabis for the first time. Now, these licenses, in a second we'll go to what happened there. These licenses, as you can see here, were the first licenses issued. In 2004, there were issued 64 licenses for cultivation, use, and possession of medical cannabis in Israel. Now, what happened in the parliament? What happened was a few patients spoke from the bottom of their hearts. We shared the truth with the government. We told the stories, we shared our pains, and they listened for the first time. They've seen for the first time a patient that really resembles the medical file that they've seen, which means we all looked very ill. We were all well-dressed and well-behaved. Our appearance wasn't a stoner appearance. We looked like 6 people should look. And all of that changed the paradigm of the people in front of us. The way they thought of us was no longer as stoners looking for cannabis, but as patients looking for medicine. Now, the problems we encountered later on, as people who were licensed, was how to grow. What strains? Where do we get the seeds? How do we dry the flowers? And many other questions that arose. We had no real information in Israel. I went and studied a little bit in Amsterdam and a little bit from the Americans and the Canadians, but there wasn't real information back then. And so we decided that it's time to establish the Medical Cannabis Association and separate it from the foundation that was in the beginning, which was the Green Leaf Party. Now, we didn't have enough knowledge after the association was established. The physicians in Israel were ignorant about the subject of medical cannabis. We had very few physicians who were willing to even consider the use of medical cannabis. There was no information in Hebrew. All of the available information was in English and other languages. There was very little knowledge worldwide relating medical cannabis back in 2004. It was a very brave decision of the Israeli government and Dr. Yehuda Baruch to take responsibility and allow for this program to evolve. And then we had to ask ourselves, how do we get the message through? Now, to do that, as you can see, we had to go through a mountain of papers, study, and learn. And the more we learned, we realized that we are really, really ignorant. And so we had to process this unknown data into something that can be taught and educated. We need to educate the public, we need to educate the government, and we needed to educate the patients. So, hold on, we're jumping here. We needed to educate everybody, and we started the program. We went to Dr. Yehuda Baruch and to the Ministry of Health as an association and started collaborations. We started collaborations about knowledge, how to grow, how to cultivate, to teach the patients who were licensed. We started to collect data and knowledge from the world and translate it to Hebrew. And since we started establishing this connection with the government and the new kind of founded administration that Dr. Baruch was leading, we managed to get to the point that they approached us when they got to the next problem that they encountered. The next problem was actually, I see I missed a slide here. The next problem was actually a patient, an HIV patient in Israel that was licensed to cultivate cannabis, just like the rest of the patients. But he was caught dealing drugs. Now, the ministry didn't want to revoke his license for using cannabis because he needed it as a patient. On the other hand, the administration obviously didn't want him to be licensed to be a drug dealer. So they came up to a decision, and they asked me if I was willing, and since I was very supportive of the subject, we came up to a decision together to start the first Compassion Club in Israel, in which I would grow cannabis for him and provide it to him. I can tell you I did not look at the consequences back then, and thankfully I didn't, because I had to meet this guy every day or every few days for the next couple of years, providing him medical cannabis in small amounts so he cannot deal with the cannabis but still be provided cannabis for his own personal use. I'm glad I did it. This was the beginning of the Medical Cannabis Administration and the program as it was. At the time, Dr. Baruch allowed us to have compassion clubs of up to 5 patients in a club. And this was the beginning of the different service providers as the medical farms that exist today. Now, if we move on, we had a case of a patient that approached us with chronic pain. Until that point, cannabis was licensed as symptomatic relief for specific illnesses. You had to have asthma, or Crohn's disease, or HIV, or cancer, or glaucoma. You had to have a specific illness to receive medical cannabis. This was the first time it was considered as being prescribed for a symptom. After long correspondence with the Ministry of Health, with Yehuda Baruch, and with the legal aids, they came up with a decision that it should be prescribed for chronic pain as an indication in its own. These days, as you can see, 50%, probably this is an old percentage. I think it's over 50% these days of chronic pain patients in Israel. I think Dr. Baruch can collaborate that. Now, the reason for this is not because most of the patients are suffering from pain and not other illnesses. Right now, we have specialized specialized centers for treating pains in Israel. Some of the pain clinics do treat with medical cannabis, and some of them do not accept any medical cannabis patients. But the ones who deal with medical cannabis have kind of an expertise with it. So a lot of the other doctors are sending their patients through the pain doctors, through the pain clinics, in order to get licensed. We aim to change it in the near future. Now, moving on. Now, this was the mixture. Now, from the media, I'm not sure if it connected or not. Okay. In the media, we had two different programs ran by Avri Gilad, one of the leading media people in Israel, concerning medical cannabis. This is the second one. The first one was back in 2009. It was called Prescribed Grass. You can find it online with English subtitles. And this was basically the turning point of the medical cannabis in Israel. Until that point, the program was running slowly. We gathered patients every month, but the quantity of patients was still small. We still had just a few farms running. We still had just a little experience. And from the moment that the movie went out and from the moment that the media accepted us, it all changed. The next day, I think the phone system collapsed both at the association and at the Barbanel hospital from patients trying to apply for medical cannabis. It took a while to get everything back in order and to start working together, but the whole system expanded. The administration was allowed to hire some personnel in order to assist with the bureaucracy. It was no longer only Dr. Yuda Baruch with a bunch of papers. It was now a few secretaries, if I'm not mistaken. From that moment on, we went on to more elaborate cooperation and collaboration with the media that on some points was to our benefits, and in some others, as you will see in a few seconds, not really. During the time that this movie was being produced, we encountered a second problem. We had a lot of patients coming, trying cannabis for the first time after doctors sent them over. There were no longer the first patients who approached the doctors saying, "I tried cannabis, it helps me, please prescribe me." Now it was patients who went to the doctor saying, "I've seen the movie. I know it should help me. Please prescribe me." So they were unexperienced users, and we had to teach them. Now think about the fact that you're coming as a, let's say, 60-year-old patient, being introduced to cannabis for the first time in your life, and they give you a joint in your hand, and they tell you, "Okay, smoke it. It will be okay. You'll feel better." I don't think I need to describe the side effects. Most people got high, most people got stoned, most people didn't like what they felt. So we had only 60% patient retention back then. 40% of the patients didn't continue to take cannabis the second month because of the side effects. So we started by asking them why, and they said, "I feel stoned." Now, we weren't satisfied with this answer, so we had to develop a language. We had to know what they mean when they say we feel stoned. We had to know what they mean when they say we feel relief. So we built a language stating the positive effects and the side effects. We separated it into the different aspects of feelings that you get while using cannabis. You don't just feel intoxicated. You feel muscle relief. You feel better appetite or less nausea. You feel pain relief. Your mood improves and you sleep better. These are usually the positive 5 effects that we're looking for in medical cannabis. The side effects of dizziness, of nausea that may be caused by excessive use of cannabis, the drop of blood pressure and raise of heart rate. These are side effects that if you know about, if you know to prepare for them, you won't be harmed by them. And on top of it, we kind of realized that we needed to teach the patients how to build a tolerance for cannabis. And after we finished doing this, and we got the patients to understand that they needed an education program, and the administration accepted this program, we actually taught this whole system to nurses, and there were licensed medical cannabis nurses in Israel to teach patients how to use cannabis. They were teaching patients how to smoke. They were teaching patients how to vaporize. They were teaching patients how to go through the iteration of the dosage from 0 to the right dose individually, not exceeding the dose that you need. And this process lasts around 3 months from start to finish until you get to your regular dose of cannabis. Now, we went through that and we got to the problem of how to cover the costs of cultivation and distribution of medical cannabis to patients and still keeping it legal. Now, we're talking about a major problem. Back then, we went over the 3,000 patient barrier, and for 5 years, the farms gave away the cannabis for free. Since we had to oblige by the single convention, and since the program was not yet initiated, and in the beginning we volunteered to give cannabis for free because when I got licensed, all I could think of was, okay, there's somebody else who needs it, and he got licensed, and he shouldn't wait 6 months until he can use his own yield. I can help. We weren't thinking about profits. We weren't thinking about system. We weren't thinking about making a company. We were just thinking about patients helping patients. Now, as it evolved, it got to a point that you can't be a patient helping 3,000 patients. You can't be 10 patients helping 3,000 patients out of your own pocket. It's just too expensive. So the administration came up with a solution, which is a great solution. We couldn't get the patients to pay for the cannabis. This would be against the law. So we got them to pay for the service. Today, the farms in Israel are providing a service of cultivating and distributing the medical cannabis for the patients. You pay a monthly fee, the equivalent of $100, to get your monthly dose. And this has got nothing to do with the prescription dose. If your doctor prescribed 20 grams a month, you'll get it for the same $100 that it would cost you as if your doctor would prescribe 100 grams. This system is working, at least in Israel it is. Now, as I promised, a little something about the bad press. We had a show in Israel called Connected. It's a TV series where people, kind of, let's say celebrities, walked around with a camera all day long and videotaped themselves. And this was edited weekly and several times a week was, I don't remember how many times, if it was once a week or twice a week, it was shown. Now, this is from the promo of the program, where one of the medical cannabis patients, who is a celebrity, was showing, bragging around that he can be the world's fastest roller, and he can roll a joint in one hand in 11 seconds while driving a car. You can imagine the response of the police and the authorities to this video. And this went on and on and on during a whole episode. Now, the next thing we know is that he was arrested. Duh. And what happened next was amazing to us. He fought back. He decided that he's not going to take it lying down. So he went to court. And he lost. But the court decided that it's legal to drive 4 to 6 hours after using medical cannabis. This was the advantage that we needed. Unfortunately, I dropped the ball on this one. I can tell you that this is a problem that up till today, we as patients face in Israel. This is something that was solved for a short time, and then the police came back pushing at this subject, and the ministry kept pushing on this subject, and right now a lot of the patients are suffering over it. But we'll go back to it. Now, we got to the point of the government decision to establish the Israel Medical Cannabis Administration. At that point, we had 8 legal farms working. About 10,000 patients in Israel received monthly cannabis supply from the providers. And the government decided to freeze the system as it is, to see what's going on, to test importation of cannabis and otherwise, but at least there was a conversation and they decided to start the program. At that point, they started a tender, which took a while, and at the end of it, ended up a second person leading the Israel Medical Cannabis Administration, which is Yuval Enshaft, who is a pharmacist. What changed? What changed since the initiation of the actual administration 2 years ago until today, which is still being built, is not really for the benefit of the patients. We see that patients are reported to the Department of Transportation. Every patient that holds a legal license to use 50 grams or over of medical cannabis per month is being reported, and they need to go over testing in order to keep their driver's license. We see a decrease in the licensed dose. We see that a lot of the doctors prescribe the same dose to continue with the doses that the patients had before, but the patients receive a license with a decreased dose without any explanation. Now we're talking about bureaucratic procedures that decide the doses instead of doctors. This is not really for the benefits of the patients. And we see a lot of problems with off-indication use that was allowed before. We see a lot of patients that had been prescribed medical cannabis for years, off-indication. They weren't in one of the 5 or 6 indications that were legal for medical cannabis, but their case was specifically overlooked, and it was decided that it was legitimate for them specifically because all else failed, and they were prescribed cannabis. And we see now that a lot of these patients do not get their licenses renewed. They need to fight for it. They need to go to the Minister of Health to ask to get their licenses back. This is the minor setback, because just as there was the minor setback when we came up with the movie and we were overflooded with calls from patients, the system had to evolve. I believe this is a call for the system to evolve again. Now, how about the future? The future of cannabis. I can tell you that in Israel, when we look at the future, we see 2 different futures. We see a future that goes where the patient organizations are not working very fast and very strong alongside the government. We see a future where the patient organizations are losing power because of this new administration that disregards them. In this future, we see patients reducing their licenses. We see a lot of patients not getting licensed, even though the doctors prescribed it. We see a lot of patients suffering. On the other hand, we see a different future. We see a future where cannabis is looked at differently. We see a future where patients are considered. So let me ask you a little something about the future, if I may. Should there be standardization of cultivation? What kind of standardization should there be? Who knows? Should there be the standardization of the final produce? Definitely yes. What kind of standardization? Who knows? Same goes with the cannabinoid content. In Israel, 2 weeks ago, I think, there has been a lecture given to the Lawyers Association by Dr. Yuda Baruch and by Dr. Miki Dor, the second of the Israel Medical Cannabis Administration right now. And he told these lawyers that he sees the future of the medical cannabis in a way that we will distribute 12 strains or 12 kinds of mixtures of CBD to THC ratio of products. Now, this doesn't sound illogical. He also said that we would standardize the cannabis and it would be distributed through pharmacies. This sounds good to me too. And then he said some things that kind of got me worried. He said that they consider grinding the cannabis so that they can create this ratio of THC to CBD, which means that they're going to completely disregard all other cannabinoids but THC and CBD. They're going to disregard all of the other elements of the plant other than THC and CBD in order to decide what the patient gets. This doesn't sound too good to us. Then we heard that on top of this, they intend to keep giving it to patients for smoking. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but right now in Israel we have 19,000 patients licensed to smoke or use cannabis in other methods. Most of the patients smoke. We have, let's say, about 400 patients eligible, according to the indications, for medical marijuana in Israel, for medical cannabis. We believe about 100,000 of them would want to apply and be prescribed medical cannabis. But I don't believe this future will be possible as long as we smoke medical cannabis. We have to transform and change the methods of consumption from smoking to different methods. We have to take it by pill, or if you want to inhale it, vaporize. Doctors feel bad prescribing smoke to patients. We can't ignore this. So there must be standardization also of means of consumption. Also for the methodologies for setting the doses, the doctor's education programs, the patient education programs, and obviously the strains of and the cannabinoid profile need to be researched more. We cannot allow for something to be implemented without any research. Excuse me a second. Now, I'll stop here for some questions and then I'll go back to the future I see worldwide and in Israel. Please. Any questions? Yes. One second.
It's okay. Yeah. Yes, I'm Stanko from Serbia, and I have one question since I have a problem. Yes. But cannabis in children, small children, CBD, THC, THC, and in acid or something like that. Could you tell us about Israel experience about children and cannabis uses?
Well, I can say that in Israel we do have experience with children. we try not to prescribe medical cannabis to children if not necessary. The program is not set for it so much, apart from cancer and specific illnesses, because we try to let people who use cannabis usually be the older people, usually over 25, 30, because we see that at younger ages, the endocannabinoid system probably still evolves or something, because we see that the use of medical cannabis in younger ages causes different changes and might cause more side effects than in older ages. We don't have a lot of experience with high CBD on children in Israel, or at least I'm not aware of. Maybe Dr. Yuda Baruch or some of the other lecturers today can share this information and experience with you. Sorry, I don't have any more to assist with. Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Ramon from Spain. I want to ask you when a patient gets access to the cannabis in the medical system, how is it cultivated? Which are the controls for this material? You know, there's some standard for organic, non-organic pesticides, heavy metals. There's
Yes. Okay. First of all, how it's cultivated is not entirely controlled. It is controlled to the point of some of the farms are producing bio and organics. Some of them produce without the organic standard, but still live by the organic methods. We do control in Israel the final product for pesticides. We control it for THC, CBD content. We control it for, I think, for heavy metals as well. We do not test and we did not standardize the processing methods and the cultivation methods of cannabis yet. Since it's private, it's private proprietary methods of the different service providers. And so we couldn't really force anything on them, and they did not share all of the information back. So it's only partially controlled. Yes, please, anyone. Sorry.
Dobrý den, slyšíte? Jo. Já mám prosbu. Vy jste říkal, že v Izraeli se platí paušální částka $100 přibližně. Můžete mi říct, jaká je nejnižší mzda v Izraeli, abych věděl, v jakém poměru to je, protože $100 je určitá částka pro bohatého, ale je to mnohem vyšší částka pro chudého člověka. Takže by mě zajímalo, jaká je nejnižší mzda nebo nejnižší příjem možný v Izraeli, abych to mohl posoudit. Děkuju.
Well, first let me repeat the question. What he asked, if I understood correctly, please just confirm. You're saying that $100 is what you understood is the standard fee for the monthly pay for medical cannabis, and you're asking, since $100 is something that might be low for Israel or high for other countries, you want to realize how much out of the income it takes. Well, the average income in Israel is about 7,000 shekels per month. This is the equivalent of about $2,000 a month. So we're talking about 5% out of the average income. If we're talking about the low income, if we're talking about most of our patients are not living by the average income, but are of lower income, and we're talking about up to 10% of their income that goes on medical cannabis per month. Anybody else, please?
Is there any system in the world that standardizes the cannabinoids, all the cannabinoids except the CBD and THC?
I don't know of any system in the world that standardized all of the cannabinoids. I don't believe any system has finished standardizing medical cannabis yet. I believe it's a world change and that we're all still learning. But what we must do is that we must consider other cannabinoids when we think of regulation and of standardization. We can't say that we only want to control one thing or another without understanding it. If we're saying that we want specific strains to be the same, we also need to know what this means. I can share from an experience a story of something that happened in Israel. We had a strain that was cultivated with one of the providers, and they had a problem, and the strain, the mother plant died, and they didn't have the same strain anymore. Some of the patients that were used to collecting this strain were really in a bad place because they had to choose now from the different variety of strains what to try next and how to start and find the right dose again and which strain will give them the same benefits with the least side effects as the one that they were used to. We do know that there are differences in the feeling, the personal feeling, the personal ingestion of the different strains and the effects of it. We don't know the whys. So what I say is that when we standardize it, we need to at least understand either the whys or the whats. So if we understand that the strains take effect, standardize it as strains. If you understand how it works, you can probably standardize the hows as well. Any other questions?
Dobrý den, já se jmenuji Dušan Dvořák a dělám výzkum Cannabis is the Cure a mám velice odlišné zkušenosti z hlediska dávkování. A vidím, že prospívají velmi nízké dávky kanabinoidů, velmi nízké, v desítkách miligramů, ale pak vidím taky, že někteří pacienti bez jakýkoliv psychotické reakce mají i stovky miligramů. Jaký vy máte zkušenosti s tím rozpětím toho dávkování?
From my experience, the range of doses, first of all, let me repeat the question again. Please repeat your name just once. This gentleman, Voja? This gentleman, Voja, is a researcher of cannabis and cannabinoids, and he's saying that he's got a lot of experience with different effects of different ratios and different doses of cannabinoids on patients. Some patients can react very effectively to very low doses of, let's say, 5 milligrams, as he explained, while other patients may not react to any dose up to 100 milligrams. Now, his question was what was my experience on the matter. I don't research cannabis on a cannabinoid content level of exact milligrams, if to be honest. But what we do have experience, and a lot of, is the doses as we use with patients. Some of them would need only 2 inhalations or 1 inhalation to feel anything, while others, at the exact same medicinal situation, would require probably half a gram. We really don't know what causes this or which person. If we would know in advance which person would require how much, it would make our lives much easier. But the iteration process goes with us that you start with 2 inhalations or 1, and then you wait. And the next day you take 1 or 2 inhalations twice a day, and you just wait. And then you build up tolerance, and you go up to 3 times a day, and then you go up to 3 inhalations every time, and then you go up to 4 inhalations every time, until you get to a dose where you feel something. This is your minimal effective dose. From that moment on, we continue raising the dose up to the point that we get to the first sign of side effects. This is your excessive dose. Then we get your dose to be separated between your minimal dose and your maximal dose throughout the day, because sometimes you want to feel less relief in the morning, but you want your head to be more clear, and more relief at night, and you don't mind falling asleep. So you'll use a little closer to your higher limit at night and a little closer to your lower limit in the morning. But this is our experience. This is how we build the system. I hope it answers your question. Yes?
Shalom, Eliza Walczak from Poland, United Experiments for Social Tolerance. You said that you're prescribing cannabis to patients based on the list of illness, not on the list of symptoms. Do you think that it's fair? And another question, is it fair to discriminate patients because of their age?
Well, first of all, as the representative of the patient organizations, I'm not a doctor and I don't prescribe cannabis. I'm being prescribed, I'm just mentioning how the system works. I really don't think that it's fair to discriminate patients according to their ages. On the other hand, I do think that there is a medicinal effect that is different on adults and on children, and we need to control a lot more the use of cannabis and cannabinoids on children until we understand at what point the endocannabinoid system evolves and is completed. So we need to research further. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use, I'm saying that unlike with an adult, that we know that all the systems and that his brain has evolved to the point that it's not going to evolve anymore, or basically in most of our cases. This is something that we know. I believe that research and collaboration with the government should be done. I believe that, yes, we should prescribe in some cases cannabis to children, just as we should prescribe in some cases cannabis to patients who are off-label. It's a matter of the specific case, because it can't be granted generally as long as we're working under the same regulations of licensing. If it was, if we're talking about the future, if we're talking about a future where the cannabis will not be given for smoking, but it will be given in pill shape or in inhaler or whichever other solution will come out, I believe that both the doctors and the patients will have better understanding of the matter, and will have more patients, also younger patients, using cannabis. I mean, think about it, that right now, since most of our patients are smoking cannabis or vaporizing cannabis, think about a child that you teach to smoke. There is some problem with the perception.
I understand that you're just talking about a concept that it's not possible in a system, but medical young patients in Israel exist. They mostly convert cannabis to butter or oils.
And they use it.
And then they use it.
I'm saying
So
we do use, we just don't have enough experience.
Patients.
We have legal patients.
But young patients.
Licensed young patients as well. What I'm saying is that they are licensed on a case-to-case base instead of an indication like with adults. If an adult would receive a recommendation, if an adult, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Baruch is here in the audience, if an adult patient of let's say a cancer patient, receives a recommendation, he will be licensed within 48 hours. If it's a 6-year-old child, I'm not sure the process will be as quick. It's not that they won't be prescribed cannabis. It's not that the license won't come. It's that the doctor will need to speak to the director and explain why he's prescribing medical cannabis to such a young patient. That's basically the difference. It goes the same as off-label uses and off-indication uses. Only for the off-indication and off-label uses, we have now a specific committee that was established in the administration that is checking whether to approve or disapprove. And until now, we're not happy with what they're doing, but it's just the beginning. Yes. Anyone else? Yes. Moment.
Apologies, I've been a little bit late. Holger Rönitz of THC Farm. I'm one of the founder of the companies, and we've been supplying cannabinoids for 16 years now to patients. Just what I would like to know from you is like, what is the average volume or grams that is prescribed in the Israeli system, and the equivalent of THC?
Okay, I can't give you the exact numbers. I can tell you that last year I've seen the presentation of Dr. Baruch saying that it was 45.5 grams per patient. That was the average or something like this? Now it's 33.5. So as you see, the doses came down, the average dose per person. We're at 33.5 grams per person, and the average THC content, I really can't tell. I mean, I think Dr. Yehuda Baruch will be much better at answering this question. Any other questions, or should I just go to my summary? Okay, so to summarize, my computer died. To summarize, no, it's dead. It's not the computer. I can say that the future of medical cannabis is very dependent on the way that we treat the patients. In Israel, as I said, right now, we have 19,000 patients being medicated every month, most of them smoking cannabis. Until this means of consumption changes, we will not be able to promote it further with the doctors and get the government's approval to expand the system further to where we want it to be. I believe that the future should be pills versus smoking, and I'm a smoker saying that. I believe the future should be different means of consumption. I think the future should be a lot of research. I believe the future should be a collaboration of patients, both in Israel and any other country working with medical cannabis, for research promoted by the patients, because we are the ones who know what interests us most. We're the ones who know what we need solved, not the governments. Doctors have their own opinion. If we won't tell them what hurts us, they won't test it. I believe the future should be global and not local, both in standardization and in the whole regulatory systems. Thank you.